I'm Rob Tracinski. This is Salon of the Refused, where we talk about ideas that are outside the mainstream. My guest today is Ed Niedermeyer, who's the senior editor for mobility technology at The Drive. Now, mobility technology is just a fancy way of saying cars, right?
It's actually a fancy way of saying everything but cars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's sort of a way to encompass everything from autonomous vehicles, shared mobility platforms, sort of all of the new ideas that everyone is getting so excited about these days. So
it's like not your traditional Detroit auto industry blog kind of idea.
No, yeah. So that's what I started covering. Was definitely Detroit, the auto industry.
I remember
where I come
reading your
from,
stuff
and
years ago in The Truth About Cars and stuff like that. Yeah.
exactly. Yep. And so I'm trying to move with the times, I guess. It's definitely where a lot of the excitement is, and I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. And I think there's definitely a need for voices in that space that are a little bit out of the mainstream. Considering the mainstream kind of tends to be just sort of cheerleading and not really thinking too hard about any of this stuff.
Well, I was going to say that having covered this for Real Clear Future back when Real Clear Future still existed, there's also a lot of flim-flam and a lot of over-optimism and boosterish stuff in that space, which leads me to the other thing you're working on, which is you have a book coming out called Ludicrous, the Unvarnished Story of Tesla Motors. And I really like that subheading, because there's been an awful lot of varnishing being done on the story of Tesla and Elon Musk.
There sure has. Yeah, I tried to break out the paint stripper. It's yeah. Look, I think that's really was the main impetus for this book, was just sort of seeing sort of a very one-sided narrative about this company. And I sort of was always a little bit skeptical about them. And then I sort of stumbled across this battery swap thing that they were doing in California. I actually ended up spending a Memorial Day weekend, 4 days down at this truck stop in between San Francisco and LA. And it turned out that it was just this complete sham. And I did some research, and it turned out the whole thing was to basically take advantage of California's ZEB credit system.
Now, explain to me what the battery swap was.
Yeah, so the idea behind battery swap, right, is that the biggest downside with electric cars is that they take forever to charge, right? And that's very inconvenient for people who are used to being able to fill up in 5 minutes and go on about their business. And so I've always been really interested in battery swap because it's sort of the way to solve that number one problem with electric cars. And there was an Israeli company called Project Better Place,
right?
And they had this really interesting business plan. It was like cell phones, where they would build this network, and they would sell you a car without the battery. So they were solving another problem too, which is how expensive electric cars are. If they could sell you a car without a battery, you're paying about the same as a normal car, and then they just basically you get a mileage plan, essentially, just like a cell phone. So so they had this whole business plan built around the idea of battery swap, whereas Tesla kind of came out and by the way, they went bankrupt and
right.
Hundreds of millions of dollars went up in flames. And then Tesla came around, and they're like, we're doing battery swap. And so I got really, really fascinated with that, because I didn't understand how that worked with the business plan, because you own a Tesla, right? If you buy a Tesla, you own the Tesla. Swapping out a battery that you own for someone else, for some other battery, is a little bit weird. People who own electric cars get a little possessive about their batteries because they know how they've treated that battery, right?
Right.
So anyway, so I was confused, and I couldn't figure out anybody. I couldn't find any reports on the internet of anybody who'd actually use this thing, and so that made me really suspicious. Long story short, so I go down there, I check it out. Not only were they not, it was the biggest traffic weekend in like 20 years or whatever, according to AAA. There were lines, long lines for the superchargers at this Harris Ranch location. Kids in the back seats crying, while their parents, they had to wait they had to wait for an hour to get to the charger and then charge for an hour. So they're stuck at this not really great spot in the middle of Central Valley for 2 hours or more sometimes. And I asked people, I was like, how much would you pay for a battery swap? And the ability to just, pull into the station that was right there. They said it was open. but it wasn't. And how much would you pay? And people said, name a price. I would pay $1,000 if I could get out of here right now. And so what they did do instead of opening that battery swap station was actually bring in a couple of extra backup superchargers and hook them up to diesel generators. And so we saw this amazing sight of these people pulling up in these Teslas and plugging them into the supercharger, and you could see the cable go about 30 feet, and there was this diesel generator putting exhaust up in the air. And you talk about the long tailpipe, and that was a pretty short long tailpipe. And so anyway, so that experience, just seeing all that, and then doing the research and understanding that the way California wrote the rules, all they had to do was really demonstrate this thing once to the Air Resources Board, and then they simply, by demonstrating that it was possible to swap a Tesla's battery in, I can't remember right now off the top of my head, I think it had to be under 10 minutes or something like that. Then okay, well, it's possible, so we'll give you double credits for every car you sell, which was worth $5,000 of credit. I mean, this adds up.
Oh yeah.
And so anyway, so uncovering this, it was like a technological facade that was sort of propping up a financial facade, because also all of Tesla's profitable quarters up until just this last year were all completely came from ZEV credits, so the sales of those credits. So like I said, it's sort of a technological facade propping up this financial facade. And when I sort of realized what was going on, then I was like, wait a second, I'm more than just skeptical now. I'm suspicious. And so I started digging into Tesla and found a whole bunch of interesting stuff, and that's where the book came from.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that with Tesla, I think what really propels it is there's this tremendous will to believe. A lot of people want, it's like in the old X-Files thing where he has that poster, I want to believe. A lot of people really want to believe in the Tesla story. Now, why is it, do you think, they want to believe so hard?
So, people have wanted to believe in electric cars for a long time. You look back at the history of electric cars, and there's always been this really profound sense among a lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people, that like this was the cure-all. This is the way that we're going to be able to maintain our lifestyles, right, of private car ownership and everything that we love about Americans, America and cars, right? But get rid of all of the environmental guilt that comes along with it, right? And it was the have your cake and eat it too thing. I mean, electric cars have always kind of been that, and to some extent, and there's always been this belief also that like people have believed that technology was mature and ready for mass adoption since the 70s, right? Since the energy crisis, and there have been like these numerous sort of false starts where people have thought, oh, it's ready, and now we're finally here, but the oil companies are keeping it down, or they're buying the battery patents and hiding them, and there've just always been these explanations for why it hasn't come yet. And then like Tesla came along and really like took that have your cake and eat it too idea and just supercharged it, right? Because not only were you getting an environmentally friendly car, you're getting like the fastest car on the road and like the highest tech car on the road and all these other cool things that came along with it.
Well, I've always thought that was the real genius of Tesla was, the electric cars before that, or even some of the more fuel efficient hybrids like the Prius or the Pius or whatever you call it, they were sort of environmental hair shirts. They were, you went with a dumpy, slow, tiny little unglamorous car to show how dedicated you were. And the genius of Tesla was, no, we're going to do a roadster. We're going to do a sports car. We're going to do something sleek and futuristic and really exciting and interesting. So it seems like, again, you can have the best of both worlds. You can have the exciting car with ludicrous mode acceleration. And then you can also have the, but without any of the environmental guilt. You can feel better than other people because you're not contributing to global warming. But let's talk about some of the realities then of what happens with the technology not really being as mature as people want to think it is. What are the problems that come up with inherently with that are still inherent problems with the electric vehicles?
Well, so I mean, look, electric cars can be great depending on where you live and how big of a problem you're trying to solve. And if you live somewhere, so like I live in Portland, Oregon, I live right next to a bunch of huge dams that are just pumping out, carbon-free electricity all the time. For someone who lives here and who makes, has short sort of commutes, there are relatively affordable electric cars. There's a lot of applications for it. Where I get suspicious or what I question is the idea that this is something that will just scale, right? Right now, cars are everywhere and they can do everything, and that's what we love about them, is that they will take us anywhere at any time, to any place, in any conditions, rain, sleet, or snow. And electric cars don't really do that. Electric cars are fundamental, right? They have these fundamental challenges. You have to plug them in to recharge them. They have limited range. And then I think the big problem that I think a lot of people don't realize in terms of just sort of the ability for electric cars to just scale infinitely is that the supply chain. Batteries come from materials of which there are limited supplies. And if you really look into that supply chain, not just, there are cell capacity. There's actually a lot of new battery plants being built, but then there are sort of these processing facilities that have to process the raw materials into battery grade materials. There's kind of a bottleneck there for some of these things. But then if you go further up, certain materials like cobalt, 60% of it comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where conditions are not great and there's a lot of not great stuff happening. And
I've been waiting for the moment in which environmentalists discover what goes into batteries.
And again, everything in life's a trade-off, right? And again, I definitely think that electric cars are great for certain applications, and there's a percentage of the market that absolutely should go electric. What I think is more emotional belief than rational analysis is the idea that there's just this, overnight or even just in 5 or 10 years that 60, 70, 80, whatever percentage of the market is going to go 100% electric. Frankly, it can't happen for not just because of the supply constraints upstream, but also because, people own cars for I think the average age of the fleet in the U.S. is 11 years old. And so it takes time to replace these cars. And a lot of people buy cars in a very rational sort of, dollars and cents calculus. And frankly, it's going to be a while before electric cars win purely on just rational analysis rather than some environmental aspect to it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, the biggest thing to me that I see is the recharge time is an issue. They've managed to work on the range and get the range up to the point where you can go enough miles on a Tesla that it's somewhat comparable to refilling the tank on your car. But what's not comparable is spending an hour at the supercharger station, if you can find a supercharger station where you are. And the scale of the infrastructure of gas stations that has been built up over 100 years, and the quickness and the ease and quickness with which you can refill a gas tank, and just go on your way and drive another couple hundred miles, and I don't know that there's you can project, well, maybe there will be new leaps forward in technology, but they're not there yet.
Well, and people have been expecting, in battery technology in particular, big leaps forward for a long time. And for example, Tesla decided to use cylindrical cells, sort of this AA battery kind of form factor for the cells that make up their battery packs, because they believed that there would be all these new chemistries coming out, and that that was the form factor that they would come out in first, and so that they would be able to be ahead of the adoption curve on that. And that just hasn't happened. And they built that strategy in 2003. Which is not that long ago, and so there are solid state batteries that are coming, and that's actually going to be the thing that gets a lot more of the big car companies into electric cars, that were sort of like Toyota, for example, has always been pretty hesitant about pure electric cars, because they've always been concerned about the safety issues around lithium-ion batteries. And the solid state batteries that are coming out don't have those safety issues. They're not really dramatically better performance. So it's not like we're going to see range, go from 200 miles to 800 miles or something, or 600 miles. It's going to be modest improvements, but the safety and I think the charge times will improve.
Okay. Well, the idea of the big automakers getting into this is, I think, raises an interesting issue because, once they get into it, they have manufacturing capacity that is enormous and well developed and, perfected over many decades. And that strikes me as sort of the undertold story, in some extent, of Tesla, is that it is a car manufacturing company.
Yes.
And they've had a number of problems with manufacturing, not just with the, with being able to get the quality levels and the fit and finish and all that right, and also with getting the sheer numbers that they've been promising. They've still got a backlog of the Model 3. I don't see a lot of them. One thing that struck me is there's a Tesla dealership on the west end of Richmond, and I occasionally go by it, and it's the only car dealership I've ever seen that doesn't have the parking lot full of models of the car, right?
Yeah. Well, it's because it's not a dealership. So dealerships are these franchises, right, where you have an array. You can go out and theoretically start your own dealership, right, for Ford or Chevy or Toyota or what have you. And you have an agreement to sell their cars, and there's all kinds of things along with that. But ultimately, then you as the dealer are the customer of that manufacturer. And this is one of the challenges that Tesla has, right, is that they have every sale goes to an individual. And the major manufacturers can get scale more easily because they have these dealers who will buy hundreds of cars, thousands of cars, hundreds of cars anyway at a time. That then they sort of take on the risk of then selling them on to the end consumers. But I think on a broader level, one of the other things that Tesla has done really well in terms of how they present themselves and the way they're perceived is that not only do they they got away from that environmental hair shirt that you were talking about, they also really did a good job of wrapping what they did up in the sort of in the image of Silicon Valley. And this is when the Model S came out. I mean, just having that giant 17-inch screen. I mean, nobody else had anything like that. Of course, that was because there were no automotive-grade 17-inch screens, and now there's actually all kinds of problems with Tesla 17-inch screens. I mean, they have these problems where bubbles form in the screens, and then adhesive will drip out into the car, and now they've got this new problem where there's these yellow bands around the edges, which happen to a bunch of iPhones, and it's because they're
I make a point of not leaving my phone in the car on a hot summer day because I don't know what it's going to do to the phone. Right,
and so what Tesla tapped into really effectively is this. Right, and if you think about the timing of this, the Model S came out in 2012. The iPhone was really, and sort of smartphones and apps, that was just really taking off. And what they did is they aligned themselves and their products with that sort of smartphone revolution in a very, very clever sort of aesthetic way. Right, they did it by, and what's hilarious is that the real reason that there's not a lot of buttons and switches and knobs in a Tesla is because it's way too expensive for them to develop and tool and get the supply chain for those at the volumes that they sell at. They couldn't do it because of the cost. That's why the Model 3 has the most simple, stripped down, minimalist interior, is that actually, designing, engineering, tooling, sourcing, manufacturing, or assembling an interior with lots of moving parts, it gets very expensive very quickly.
Right. So, I mean, if you're doing 50,000 cars a year, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what the big automakers are doing.
Right. So your fixed cost to develop those parts can only get spread over so many units. Whereas if you're selling 10 million cars a year, like GM or Toyota or Volkswagen, you have all this scale to spread those fixed costs across, and that's how you make it work in the car business. So they made a virtue out of their problems, and they've aligned themselves sort of as we're a tech company, and they said this explicitly in the IPO. Right. They said we're a technology velociraptor. We're not a car company, and the reality is that they are a car company. They've just never really owned it, and I think what that's tapped into is people believe, because they've seen this revolution of the iPhone and the smartphone and the App Store and all these other things, the Uber. I mean, think of all of the things that smartphones have changed. They think that technology is what changes things. And in things like communication and information technology, technology is being at the cutting edge of technology is what makes the difference. In the car industry is like, it's like a ground game kind of business, right? It's about
I think it's
blocking and tackling.
Yeah, there's that Silicon Valley hubris, which basically says information technology, which can be changed and manipulated very quickly, and can you can make an app and then make a new app, and you can people can move from app to app very quickly. They think that that's technology. And this was one of my pet peeves when I was doing Real Clear Future, is that people have the idea technology means Silicon Valley and it means apps, whereas technology also means manufacturing and
yes.
And the gritty stuff that's viewed as low tech, even though there's a lot of technology involved in an automobile plant. Well,
Go ahead.
And that brings me back to the Gigafactory and to this idea that Elon Musk had, and I think which was supposed to be his big breakthrough and a competitive advantage against all the other existing traditional manufacturers, was the idea of a super automated factory.
Yeah. So I think it was sort of catching up to him that, like, really, if you look at the history of the auto industry, what makes the big differences, what creates the sort of companies that define their epoch of the car industry is manufacturing, right? It was Henry Ford was really the first one, and I mean, what that production system that he created did was just absolutely mind blowing. It made cars go from being this tiny niche rich person's thing to something that anybody, any middle class person could afford. And then subsequent to that, Toyota and the Toyota production system. I mean, people, and this is what I mean about technology is not the be all end all of the car business. You look at Toyota. Toyota went from being a loom factory, right? They literally were a spinning and weaving company, to the most dominant automaker there is in the course of 40, 50 years. And they did it not because their cars were A, sexy, but B, high tech. I mean, Toyotas have never been, and they probably don't like people saying this, but like they've never been on the cutting edge of technology, and it hasn't mattered, because at the end of the day, most people, and this kind of ties back to sort of the issue with electric cars and other stuff, is most people just want something that will get them from A to B reliably, right? And so there are some people who want the latest and greatest technology, but really, and so I think Elon Musk was starting to realize that, and he realized that manufacturing was very clearly Tesla's weak point, and it had been throughout the history of the company. It had always had this ambivalent relationship to manufacturing because it saw itself as these creative engineer startup guys, right? And again, manufacturing, it's the totally culturally the opposite thing, right? So in a startup, you want to have dynamic, creative, talented creative people, let them free, let them work all night and drink a lot of Red Bull and come up with these cool creative ideas, right? Manufacturing is the total opposite. You want people.
Wasn't there a point where Elon Musk was like camping out on a sleeping bag in the factory, as if you could just make a factory work by pulling a lot of all-nighters? It's a very Silicon Valley tech startup kind of mentality.
Right. When what you actually need is a system in place where everyone knows what their role in the system is, and you create a machine. And it's funny because he's like, he has that line about how car companies are like cybernetic collectives. Well, yeah, I mean they're organizations of people in which everyone plays a role, and making an organization of the scale of a car company work is very much a management regimentation order kind of a thing. And so because the problem is that building a really effective company culture is one of the hardest things there is to do. And because you don't just have to be smart enough to understand how a good system made up of people should work. You also just have to take time. It takes time, right? And for a startup, time is anathema, right? That's right. If you don't want something that's going to take time, you're constantly growth hacking, right? You're constantly
you put out the buggy beta version of the product, knowing that people will, the early adopters will love it anyway, and then they'll help you improve it, and then eventually it'll get halfway decent.
Right. So I think he thought, okay, well we're tech guys, we'll just come up with a technological solution to the manufacturing problem. Well. The idea of sort of getting humans out of the manufacturing, car manufacturing business, that was last really popular in like the early 1980s. Granted, technology has come away since then, But General Motors under Roger Smith, I mean, they tried to build a quote unquote lights out factory,
Right.
and it was an absolute failure. They wasted tons of money, and they couldn't make it work, and they couldn't get the quality. I mean, as Elon went on to say, humans are underrated. Humans make robots look pretty shitty at like almost everything, except for the most simple tasks.
Well,
And
I think this connects in a way to the self-driving car hype, because we were supposed to have them by now. We were supposed to have them last year. You know, according to the projections of 5 to 10 years ago, we were supposed to have them in 2018. Then we're going to have them in 2022. The experiments aren't working out that well, because it turns out that driving is a fantastically complex and complicated thing, and computers, with all the advances they've made, all the AI, have not quite caught up to the human eye and the human brain. And the same thing applies to the self-manufacturing car, which is sort of what Elon Musk had in mind, is that the manufacturing process involves a lot of the things that are the same way, things that require human eyes and brains on, to be observing the process and managing the process, and can't be automated yet.
So last November, my colleague Bertel Schmidt and I did this round the world tour of car factories. We went to like 8 car factories in different places around the world, and in like 18 days, it was a wild, crazy trip. But the most amazing thing about that to me was really that we spent 2 days in Toyota City, which is this where Toyota's headquarters are, and again, they have this Toyota production system. It's always been the core of what they do, and it's always been a company that like is, and I know like every company says like, oh, it's about our people, but like really, they look at people the way I think a lot of people in the technology sector look at technology, in that they look, people look at technology and they see all this infinite possibility. And what's amazing is that Toyota sees the same thing in people. They think that it's almost like there's almost like a weirdly religious aspect to it, that like, we kind of like just not living up to our potential, but like with discipline. It's almost like monastic, right? With discipline and focus, and like
there's a sort of a Japanese attitude there.
It is, yeah.
This idea of perfection through craftsmanship, human perfection through craftsmanship, and the sort of spiritual aspect of craftsmanship is a very Japanese idea. Also, one that's had popularity in the West. The arts and crafts movement was sort of taking that idea in the West. So that's has a lot of old roots to that.
Right. So instead of saying, okay, let's go find the coolest, most high-tech robots and put them in, because we have the end goal of just getting people out of the system, what they do is they try and get every person who is a part of their system to be constantly coming up with very little ways of making their own work a little bit more efficient. And so like how that manifests itself in one of the most interesting ways is this thing called Karakuri Kaizen, which are literally, they're like, I don't want to call them Rube Goldberg machines, because Rube Goldberg machines are like as complicated as they could be, and these are as simple as they can be. They're no power. They are powered either by the weight of a tool or maybe a spring or a counterweight, but just like the most simple machines you could possibly imagine. And all they'll do is, for example, you're taking a screw, a wrench, and you're wrenching something over here, part of your workflow, and then you put the tool here, up here, and then the weight it'll like slide down.
Oh, cool.
And then the process of doing that, it'll bring the next bolt up. And so so it's like the most simple automation you can possibly imagine. But rather than having one big sophisticated robot, they have all of their people constantly developing these very small, it's like a distributed automation, right? And what they say is that the only way that you can really automate things well is if there are people who know how to do the job well. And then because you need to have those human skills. And so they've actually started training people more since sort of more automation has come up, because they say you need to have high skilled people in order for to even know how to start to program these robots and use them effectively. So anyway, I kind of that was back on the manufacturing thing and not
No,
the
that's totally fascinating though. So I'm very happy to hear about that. But I think this gets back to though with the failure of the super automated, sort of super technologically automated robots are going to build everything vision. I think that's sort of underappreciated how that affects Tesla, because what it means is that they're now high. I think I saw some figure about this Fremont plant they have. There used to be a NUMMI plant for Toyota. It was Toyota, wasn't it?
It was actually originally a General Motors plant.
It was GM and like a Toyota.
Toyota came in and they were a joint venture so that GM could actually learn the Toyota production system. It was actually an incredibly revolutionary place and moment for the American car industry. It was sort of when they finally realized, like, you know, the arrogance is not getting us anywhere. We have to like open our minds to like learning how it is that these people are kicking our butts.
Well, I want to get back to that in a second. I think that's relevant to this. But so he has this NUMMI plant that used to be Toyota GM joint venture, and now he's producing fewer cars there with more people than were operating there under the old system. And that's really that's why Tesla's been burning through so much cash, is because they have to hire a lot more people to produce cars at a much lower rate of efficiency than a standard automaker.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. I don't know that their labor cost alone is why they struggle to make money. It's just a very hard business to make money in, right. For anybody, right? And there are lots of parts of it. I think their quality is one of the reasons that they're having a hard time making money, is that if you read the forums and the problems they have and the repairs they have to make and what they have to do for their customers for free to just keep them, going along. Yeah. That's a really big issue. But again, quality and right, it comes from manufacturing.
And I think the bigger issue here is that with this sort of Silicon Valley hubris of we can do so much better than the traditional car industry. It's almost like he's sort of stuck back in the 70s of thinking that the auto industry is Detroit in 1974, sort of complacent and bloated and ready to be ripe for a new competitor to come in, but the auto industry as it exists today is actually extremely competitive, and any new idea you have has probably been tried by them and had capital put into it on a larger scale. And you really need to be operating at that larger scale to compete. I mean, they say you need to make 10 million cars a year to be competitive.
Well, 10 million is the top tier. So Toyota, GM, Volkswagen are the big ones. And then I guess sort of Nissan, Renault, Alliance, they're up in the sort of 10 million realm. What Sergio Marchionne of Fiat Chrysler said as sort of the impetus for bringing Fiat Chrysler together was that you have to sell 5 million a year basically to be competitive. But I mean, that's it's an order of magnitude more than what Tesla even can currently aspire to in the short term. Right now, they're trying to get to 500,000 units a year. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so that is a like I said, it's an order of magnitude less than sort of where people have said the bar is to be competitive in the business. Now, frankly, if Tesla sort of were to get over the sort of and this is the problem with hubris, right? Is that it pulls you in too many different directions. If you even just focus your hubris in one direction, you can make it, right? I mean, Ferrari has plenty of hubris, but they're not out there saying that we're going to make a $35,000 car, right? Right. And I think if Tesla were to focus, they have an extremely powerful brand. They have a customer base that will literally put up with almost anything and pay any price and bear any burden to drive their cars. The traditional sort of business response to that is, let's make a premium brand, let's raise our prices, let's make special editions, let's fleece these suckers, frankly.
Well, I think you have to view it as the idea that this car is not a rational calculation. It's something people, that's what the luxury cars and the high performance cars are like. It's not a rational calculation. It's not, I need to get the kids to school in the morning. It's, I want something exciting, and I want something high performance. I want something that's makes me feel special. Right. I want the image. And that's what strikes me is that the environmentalist dream that they're trying to create is, we have to create a mass market car. We have to have the $35,000 car so that everybody could be driving one. Yep. But what they can actually achieve is, we can make a luxury car for $100,000.
Yes. which and that's what they've done. I mean, originally the Roadster was supposed to be $85,000.
Right.
Eventually it got to
There's been inflation.
110. Sure. Yeah. Well, then they had to raise the price. By the time it got to market, it was basically $110,000. The first year of production for the Roadster, they sold at a loss, at a gross margin loss. Actually, on a bill of materials loss. Literally, the parts that made up the Roadster for the first years cost more than what they were getting for it. Right. And then the Model S, which is their second car, it was supposed to be half the price and twice the volume, and they said repeatedly, and they got the government loan on the idea that this would be a $50,000 car. Well, the average transaction price for Model S is about $98,000, right? Almost exactly the same as the Roadster.
Well, and that's the thing about the Tesla, the Model S, is I look at it and I think this is a $100,000 car, but it's kind of equivalent to what you can get for a $50,000 car. You can get you can get a really nice Mercedes Benz for in the neighborhood of $50,000, but you pay they get people to pay the upcharge and go to more like an Audi S8, one of the super duper luxury car. They get to go more to that price range, not so much on the quality of the car or the interior or that sort of thing, but more on the image and the people want to have that I'm helping save the world. And I got to say, it's a little bit of, I see this, my wife's an architect, so I see this in the building industry a little bit with the LEED certified things. And so oftentimes there's a lot of what's called greenwashing that goes on, where it's like, well, I want to put in the more expensive roof tiles.
Yep.
And well, hey, they'll help me get a higher LEED score. I'm not just putting in a higher quality material, I'm saving the world. So it's like, It's a way to say it's okay to splash out on a luxury status symbol because I've got some virtuous thing that I'm doing by doing that.
Yeah, no, and actually my friend Alex Roy, who I co-host the Autonomycast with, he says it really well, which is, and actually I think maybe he got it from Horst de Dieu. I'm not sure, but the genius of a Tesla is that it simultaneously virtue signals and vice signals, right? And so this guy Horst de Dieu was like, he's like, I had these friends who would buy Jaguars back in the day, and like the unreliability of that car and like the horrible situations that it would strand him in were like something he would love to talk about, at cocktail parties and stuff, because it shows you're committed, and you're committed enough to being your own person that you're willing to, have to call a tow truck like multiple times a month. And so there's that vice signaling, but then vice signaling isn't really the right way to put it.
Humble brag, I think it says that thing. It's like, poor me, I had to walk home from my Jaguar.
Right, exactly. It's a sort of like rich people problem, right?
Right.
It shows that you can afford to have these sorts of problems and that you can take them on willingly, that you choose them. And then there was a
Bloomberg headline for the ages a couple of weeks ago about the problems of luxury super yacht owners having champagne corks popping and hitting their priceless art.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's the ultimate like rich person dilemma. Oh, what do I do? The champagne cork hit my priceless piece of art.
Totally. And so for a Tesla to have that kind of an amazing luxury brand, or premium, it's not really luxury, like premium brand, and to then want to get into the mass market makes zero sense. Like the mass market for cars is a commodity business. You are selling a point A to point B commodity, right? And sure, there's there's sort of like the entry luxury market, and there's a lot of cars get sold and leased and that. But like at the end of the day, like if you want to actually make money, you want to be as high up the food chain as you can in terms of getting people to pay you extra just for your brand, right? Because that doesn't cost more to manufacture. It doesn't cost more to develop. It's an intangible that lets you make more money. And
that's kind of why I think. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just the fundamental question I have, and we may never really know the answer to this, is would Tesla be as powerful as a premium brand if it didn't always have that sort of messianic, like, you're paying a lot for this car, but you're by buying it, you're going to actually help people less fortunate than you, well, it's going to help us develop a car for the people who are less fortunate than you, right? And that we're going to ultimately be this gigantic mass market car company. Without that sort of aspect to it, would it have become as powerful of a brand as it is? I don't know. Maybe.
I certainly don't think it would have a market cap higher than GM, even for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and and I think that's why, that's why they had to do this, ambitious manufacturing plan. That's why they have to say that they're going to have self-driving cars, is because at some point, people will invest in you because they believe in what you're doing to a certain extent. But at some point you have to have at least a story about how you're going to make more money than GM selling, again, like an order of magnitude fewer cars.
Right.
And that's what these things are about. It's about saying, well, someday the car will just drive itself. And so people will be able to buy it and it will go off while they're at work and earn money for them and pay itself off. It'll be like this economic, perpetual motion machine, which is also very clearly sort of taking autonomous drive technology and trying to make it fit into a traditional, selling private car mode, which really doesn't make a lot of sense if you look at how the technology will actually work.
Well, and also a lot of that stuff is very speculative, like, well, someday the technology will work out really great and this will all be, this will all work better. But my thought is, given how competitive and efficient the automobile industry is, I'm thinking when electric cars actually become usable as a mass market product, Toyota's going to build 5 million of them, and all these other companies. Yeah, Volkswagen. The Chevy Bolt, I think, is probably the most successful sort of non-glamorous more mass market priced version of this. That the minute this becomes something that's a viable option for the average person on the pure dollars and cents practical level, these other companies are going to come eat Tesla's lunch because they get the manufacturing down.
Yeah, exactly. And they already have the factories, right? They already have the employees. They have the system in place that's been built up, and more importantly, it's been refined over a century in a lot of the cases of a lot of these companies. And I think that's one of the really fundamental mistakes that the sort of tech hubris makes, is that they're sort of like, well, these car companies aren't putting 17-inch screens in their cars. It must be because they're idiots, or like they're just stuck in their ways or whatever. They're the incumbents and we're the disruptors. So the fact that they're not putting 17-inch screens in their cars must mean that they're dumb and we're smarter, when in fact there are no automotive grade 17-inch screens that you can put in a car. And if you look at what's happening to the ones that Tesla put in, and Elon Musk brags about them not being automotive grade, and you read the forums and you can tell why. Nobody wants to replace every screen in every car like multiple times, because they cannot get these things, to stand up to the conditions in a car, the heat swing, temperature swings, and things like that.
I think you were pointing out the other day, there's a reason why the technology in cars seems to be kind of low-tech and old-fashioned by the standards of Silicon Valley, is because you want to be behind the curve. You want to go with the tried and true and the tested. It's something that's going to work without any upgrades for 11 years.
Right. Cars just aren't, like, smartphones just aren't cars. Cars just aren't smartphones. Smartphones aren't cars. These are two separate things, right? And it really frustrates me when people confuse them, because, and so, like, the people like to say, well, you look at in a traditional car interior and there's all these buttons, and you look at the Tesla and there's no buttons. It's just one big touch screen. And this is like, you can tell this one's the iPhone and this one's the BlackBerry, and therefore this one is going to take over and this one is going to die. And it's like, when you use a BlackBerry, like, there's no life and death advantage to doing that. But the difference between looking at a touch screen, going through the menu to find, the setting, having to look at something, and in order to change it, versus being able to reach down to that knob that is always in the same place and always does the exact same thing, and you know it, and you don't even have to look at it, and you barely have to even think about it, and you just reach down, turn the knob to turn up your music or turn down the heat or whatever else it is. It allows you to keep your eye on the road. It's just there's no such thing as distracted phone use, right? I mean, you don't run the risk.
Phone use is what distracts you from everything else, yes.
But you don't run the risk of killing yourself or other people if you are not, if you take your eyes off your phone. Whereas when you're driving, taking your eyes off the road is extremely dangerous.
Right.
Yeah, and
then we can talk about the Musk also making a lot of promises, or Tesla also making a lot of promises about automated driving and so-called quote-unquote autopilot, which isn't really autopilot. But that gets into the wider issue of, getting very excited about the idea of autonomous driving, but how difficult it really is has proven to be to implement it.
Yeah. So, and here, I actually think this is the issue that is most dangerous to Tesla, because, manufacturing, whatever, they can, they can always be a premium brand or whatever else. But with the self-driving car thing, they have taken people's money for a what they call full self-driving. Elon Musk said when he announced it is level 5. Level 5 means 100% automated, don't have to look at anything, touch anything, do anything.
Go take a nap.
Take a nap in any and all conditions, right? So level 4 means fully automated, but only in a limited domain, right? So maybe in a, within one city or just on a, but geofence basically.
Right.
Level 5 means it'll be just like a car, right? Our cars today are level 5, and that we can, or, if you have a truck or something, right, SUV, you can just take it anywhere. Anytime, doesn't matter the weather or whatever. So basically the entire industry, everybody who's serious in self-driving car development says that level 5 is not even worth talking about. And Elon Musk is already taking money for it. and if you look at just the change in tenor, back in, and really why Tesla got into this was in 2013, and nobody knew it at the time, even though they were a public company. But they almost went bankrupt in the first quarter of 2013, actually twice in 2012. But he was so scared that he made a deal with Google. And this was before Google came out and showed their little koala car, the Firefly. Right. And so everyone just thought it was experimental. Well, he had this negotiations with Google. They had basically a deal in principle, according to the reporting. And then they pulled off this miraculous 1 quarter turnaround. Their stock, this was right when their stock started going crazy. And Elon Musk went on this, this is what I call in the book sort of where ludicrous mode, the company went into ludicrous mode, where they're making new announcements every week. But he had never talked about autopilot or self-driving or any of that stuff until that point. And it seems pretty clear to me, he saw what Google was doing, realized how far along they were, and realized, wait a second, we're not going to be the hot Silicon Valley mobility trend anymore. Electric cars are going to be yesterday's news, and autonomous cars are going to be tomorrow's news. And that's why there's always been this sort of frantic aspect to it, and sort of, creating something that is basically, the technology for autopilot has been around effectively since the 1990s, right? Adaptive cruise control has been around since the 90s. Lane keep assist has been not quite as long, but it's still, a lot of brands have it. And Tesla just took that technology and pushed it farther than anybody else was willing to push it, or that their lawyers would allow them to push it, right? And blurred the lines about what is a driver assist, between what's driver assist and what is self-driving.
Right.
And it was all just because he knew he had to stay on top of this wave. Well, what's happened is that the wave stopped, right? When that Uber crash happened, and frankly, when several of these Tesla autopilot deaths have happened,
right,
all of a sudden everyone's like, whoa, hit the brakes. We need to adjust expectations here. This technology will happen, but we can't be in this race to try and look further ahead than everyone else. And so the whole space just chilled and took a step back, and Elon had no choice. Tesla had no choice. They had to keep being at the forefront of that, and now they just look like charlatans.
Well, I think actually that the over-promising, the extravagant promises, and the hype is actually, that's part of Tesla's brand. Because, part of the appeal was, okay, mass market electric car, we're going to fight global warming. But the other part of the appeal is Elon Musk as the great innovator, the visionary billionaire. Now, I kind of have to hand it to him. We're in an anti-businessman, anti-billionaire kind of culture, right? Where, everybody goes to Starbucks and drinks their coffee, but Howard Schultz wants to run for president, and he's a bad guy. Everybody hates Jeff Bezos of Amazon. We don't even want his stinking jobs in New York City.
Yeah.
And every Mark Zuckerberg. Don't get me started on Mark Zuckerberg. Every billionaire, even the tech billionaires, are bad guys. But Elon Musk alone, as an Ayn Rand fan, it's like how I kind of think he gets treated like an Ayn Rand hero, one of her heroic businessmen, but greenwashing that in a way that's acceptable in a way to people who would not be Ayn Rand fans, which I think is kind of amusing. And I kind of always think of the million people on Mars thing. right?
Yeah.
So he makes these ludicrous claims, but the sheer ludicrousness of it, makes him look like a visionary. Yeah. And that's part of maintaining the brand and keeping the stock price up and keeping the buyers enthusiastic. You're not just investing in Tesla. You're not just helping the planet. You're also being on the cutting edge of the vision of a visionary billionaire.
Yeah. And what's really fascinating to me about that is that, you'll talk to people, particularly in the autonomous drive space. I will talk to people and people will say privately, that they think that what he's doing is completely irresponsible, that it's dangerous, that he's putting people's lives at risk, that he's conning people, that there's no way he can possibly deliver. I mean, then people will just devastating critiques of him privately, but it never comes out really publicly from within Silicon Valley, because there's always this sense that, Elon is sort of the mascot for Silicon Valley, and that he's pushing it too far, but if he really comes completely crashing down, the knock-on effect on everybody else in Silicon Valley, it will create a crisis of confidence in Silicon Valley as an entire culture, which is ironic also because,
they're actually making that more likely to happen.
Exactly, by not dealing with it themselves, and not saying that, hey, this guy doesn't represent us. But he does enough good for them that he keeps that fire of wanting to believe, like you said at sort of the beginning of the show, alive. And like a lot of technology is really like an ideology or like a religion almost, that people just believe that it's this fundamentally good thing that will always create good progress and all this sort of stuff. And Elon is the high priest of that. And because of that, he can't get called out for his excesses, which is really scary because some of his excesses are very excessive.
Well, I think there is a cultural sort of hunger for that kind of technological optimism. Yeah. I think it's interesting that it has to be clothed in environmentalism, because environmentalism is the primary force of technological pessimism right now, right? The idea that, all of our high technology is destroying the planet, all the industry that we've built, it's all destroying the planet. We went too far. Yeah. And I think it's precisely because he manages to combine the two. Yeah. This excessive technological optimism that's still clothed in a way that's acceptable for the techno-pessimists of the environmentalist movement. And it unleashes something that's pent up that people really want. They want that technological optimism. Yeah. But, I sometimes feel it's like arguing about Donald Trump, because people say, well, here's what people want to see in Donald Trump. They want somebody who will challenge political correctness. I'm like, well, great, but maybe we could have had somebody else do that.
Right. No, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that's one of the most amazing things about Elon Musk is that for years, he has been able to do something that almost everybody in American public life hasn't, which is appeal to sort of cross this vast cultural divide in this country, right? There aren't, if you try and think of people who have, such strong appeal, even within limited parts of sort of both sides of that cultural divide, there's not a lot of other people that can do that. I think that's actually been changing, though. I think certainly my perception is that, and as someone who's been was sort of more early on the sort of watchdogging and criticizing side of this, it was very lonely for a while, and it's gotten a lot less lonely in the last couple of years. Good. And frankly, it's been among people on both sides. I think the left has really turned hard against him on labor issues, and sort of seeing him as a fake environmentalist, maybe to a certain extent, flying the private jet, all that other stuff. And I think there's So I think obviously things are the attitude towards him has changed.
Right. Well, it strikes me as something similar to, I had a friend on recently who's spent the last 10 years in China, and he said, I've been predicting that that the situation in China is going to deteriorate. I've been predicting that for 10 years, and somehow it never seems to happen. That something's got to give at some point, but it seems to keep going. And criticizing Tesla sort of feels the same way. That at some point something's got to give. And yet it still somehow manages to keep levitating for another quarter.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because the company Tesla themselves in their company blog has accused me of being short their stock, or at least it's very strongly insinuated, which I never have been. And frankly, I'm really glad I haven't, because you look at these guys are looking at the numbers, right, and they're like, okay, at some point economic gravity sets in, and you can't defy that forever. And they've been making big bets on it for years now, in some cases since 2013, and it just hasn't happened. And so, yeah, I mean, and that's been actually one of the big challenges of writing this book is like, it could, in theory, all collapse overnight tomorrow or today. I mean, over the course of this conversation, something could have happened that could be the catalyst, because the foundations are in some ways so shaky, but they're also just so resilient as a company, and Elon Musk is so resilient as an individual and as a brand. You really can't predict how this is going to play out. And like I said, this has been I've lived and breathed this stuff for years. Been my main focus since 2015, and I have no idea what's going to happen, which is kind of what makes it a great story.
Well, I think that, it's a lot like the sort of the tulip. I called it an environmental tulip mania. In a sense, it has that character of a bubble. And the thing about a bubble is you can know it's going to pop, but that's different from knowing when it's going to pop.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
'Cause I know a lot of people who were predicting that the housing market was going to crash, and they were right. It was going to crash, but they were predicting it for 4 years straight, and it took a long time. Some of them lost money predicting it for a long time. Yep. But so you have a book coming out on this. Now let me let you give a plug for the book. When is that coming out?
So right now, I guess it's scheduled for August. You can find it on Amazon. If you can pre-order it. If you search for Ludicrous Tesla on Amazon, you'll find it. It's published by Ben Bella Books, and it's been a long time in the making. And I think if you're at all curious about any of this stuff, you will find some interesting stuff in there.
I'm definitely going to get it. So that's Ludicrous, the untold story, or the unvarnished story of Tesla Motors. Yep. My guest has been Ed Niedermeyer. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
If you enjoyed this conversation, you can follow our channel on YouTube, follow our podcast, and for more ideas and analysis, you can go to the Tracinski Letter, www.tracinskiletter.com. You can also support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Salon of the Refused. I'm Rob Tracinski. Thank you for listening.